So I wanted to do a poll myself. I just wanted to make sure I understood who's in the audience. So raise your hand if you are a technologist, an engineer. Nobody. Oh, yeah, good. So a few. Product managers? A few more. Designers? Wow, awesome. Anybody else? Research. Content. Entrepreneurs. Healthcare, but that's like, yeah, yes, healthcare. Awesome. All right. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask before I got started was, how many of you feel that it's on your shoulders to carry your company into this era of doing something unexpected and wonderful for your customers? Okay, great. Well, I'm going to reflect on a story that's about 8 years in the making. I don't know if you guys know Intuit, but Intuit makes TurboTax, makes Mint, makes QuickBooks, and it's kind of a tough business. And we've been around for 30 years. And in those 30 years, much of that was dedicated to building software that was very easy to use. And about 10 years ago, we had a CEO from GE who looked at the growth of our company, which had sort of flattened out. Not a good sign. And then he looked at Net Promoter Score. Do you guys know what Net Promoter Score is? A lot of nodding heads, right? Sentiment from the customer of whether or not our products were doing something wonderful for them. And that also was flattening out, if not declining. Also very scary. Because Intuit's main acquisition channel is through word of mouth, right? We don't spend that much on marketing. It's all about like what our customers tell others. And if Net Promoter Score is going down, then growth is going to go down. And we're looking at, we're looking ahead for the next 20 years and we're going, how are we going to turn this around? And as we reflected on it, we realized that what had gotten us there wasn't going to get us to the future. And our culture had turned into this culture of rigor and about risk aversion and about back-of-the-box software feature lists, right? Which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. But this idea of Intuit being a culture of innovation was just really not within the expectations of an employee base that was about 8,000 people at the time. And so he asked a very simple question to the head of corporate strategy, which was, what are we going to do? How are we going to grow? What are we going to do to get beyond ease as our competitive differentiator? And thankfully, that gentleman came to the design organization and said, help me. And Scott, our founder, also gave him one other input, which was, he's on the board or was on the board at Procter & Gamble and said, Procter & Gamble's kind of on the same trajectory, on the same path. And what they've done is this thing called design thinking. And it's really starting to spur on innovation inside of their culture. So you might want to think about that. And so that began the journey. Design thinking, going beyond ease, flat Net Promoter Scores. I mean, definitely somewhat of a burning platform. One last thing, our reputation was the best run, no growth company in the Valley. So we also had that going for us, which was really fantastic. So I want to talk today about how we moved from being a customer-focused technology company to becoming a customer-focused, design-driven technology company. And it's taken a long time. This is not something that happens overnight. It was a dream a long time ago, and I'm happy to say that we're there today, which means that for some of you who are just starting on this path, I want you to feel very encouraged that you can make this happen in your organization too. It does happen. And it starts for us with our mission, right? So we wake up every morning to improve your financial lives in a very profound way. And that is our promise to ourselves and why we get up in the morning. And our promise to you is to simplify the business of your life. And I think it's important to show this because you have to start from something that stitches the entire organization together. This was never going to be an initiative that was going to be on the backs of a couple people to carry everybody. This is going to be something where you have to change the way that 8,000 people think and act so that you can go beyond your customers' expectations. So we have 2 core capabilities at the company. And when we talk about core capabilities, we mean this is expected of every single person that works at the company. We have 8,000 employees at Intuit. So it doesn't matter if you're in finance or if you're in HR or if you're a designer or an engineer. There are 2 things that are expected of you. The first is what we call customer-driven innovation. This is our model on the left. This is where we innovate. So we're a little bit different than some companies in the Valley in that we are obsessive about our interactions with customers. That's how the company started, and that is our heritage, and that is something that will never change. It's kind of what sets us apart, and it's very fun and very exhilarating. But it's not just about what the customers say that they want. It's got to be at that intersection of it's got to be a big unmet problem that we and our partners can really solve well so that we can build durable advantage, right? Otherwise, we're an innovation engine that's just making a lot of noise for the organization. So we want to do good, so this is where. And then how we innovate is what we call design for delight. Now, design for delight, I'll talk about in much more detail, but this is how. We never had that at the company. For 25 years, this is the only thing that we said was the core capability of the company. And then we added only one thing, which is how. And I think this is really important because when you talk about creating a culture and making sure that everybody can do the best work to delight your customers, it's important to think about how you hold everyone accountable to that, right? And it doesn't start with just a CEO's letter in the New York Times. You have to go further. So this is pretty impressive, an impressive day when that happened. Just a little bit more context for us. For some of you guys, you may be unfamiliar with a period in our lives as designers when the left was how we had to work. But for a 30-year-old company, that was absolutely ingrained in our day-to-day behavior. And that's because when you have desktop software and you put a gold CD on the line and then you make a bunch of copies of that and then you put it in a box and saran wrap it and put it on a shelf, if something's wrong, you can't pull it off the shelf, rip open the boxes, put a new CD in, right? So because of that, this is the culture that we had. And we knew that as we were moving online, we're moving online as a SaaS company, we're moving to mobile, there's a whole change in the way that we have to think and the way that we have to do. And so how are we going to accelerate the company? How are we going to go from that to this, right? It's pretty significant. And I will say that we brought a lot of people along. And then there was a lot of people who decided that wasn't for them and they didn't come along. But this is at the heart of the culture shift that had to happen for us. So I like to talk about that quite a bit. In the end, when the CEO asked, what are we going to do to go beyond ease? We said, well, we need to wow our customers. And we had a lot of internal debate about, well, what is wow? How do you define wow? What is that? And in the end, we ended up saying, it is about doing something that is unexpected, beyond their expectations, in a good way. Clearly, not unexpected in a bad way, but in a good way. And that actually what we can call that is delight. And we had a lot of exercises to help people articulate this for us. It's like, when's the last time you've gone out of your way to talk about a product or service to somebody else? And why did you talk about that product or service to somebody else? What made you do that? And what kept coming out in the language was well, it's because I was delighted. They did something that I wasn't expecting. And sometimes that thing that wasn't expected was at the very beginning of the experience, sometimes it was in the middle of the experience, sometimes it was the very end of the experience. It didn't matter. It was just this premise of going beyond my expectations. And so for our company, we define delight this way, right? Going beyond their expectations, evoking positive emotions, and thinking about it end to end. You know, as I look at this 8 years later, it seems like a no duh. But 8 years ago, even though we're in an industry of finance, right, we said in our culture that finance was all about accuracy, and it was all about getting it right, right? And that there was no emotion there. How many people are emotional about their money? Right? It's actually one of the most emotional things in our lives, right? We're very irrational about it. Often, when we do crazy, we've watched so many crazy systems that people put together to watch their money, control their spending. I mean, it defies all reason. And yet, we as a company had said, oh, no, like, if they just did it this way, then they will get this outcome on the other side. And we weren't embracing sort of the irrational side of money. And so even saying evoking positive emotion was a huge change for us, right? It's not about just fixing the bugs and getting it right. If you fix the bugs in your software, the customers are going to say, thanks, shouldn't have been broken in the first place, you know? But they're not going to run out to their neighbor and say, oh, guess what? TurboTax fixed their bug. That's silly, right? So we had sort of had this culture where we're like, oh, well, as long as we do this and this and this, fix bugs, say that we're the easiest, then we can win their loyalty and we can win their promotion. And that's just not the case. So evoking positive emotions, going beyond in ease and benefit, right? And why? So they can tell others. So let's dive deep a little bit into design for delight. How many of you guys have done a design thinking workshop? You guys kind of know it? Great. And all of you guys probably know that design thinking is considered a process. It's a methodology to help you innovate. And for us, one of the biggest lessons that we learned early on, and it's actually one of the lessons of mine, is I tried to take the design thinking process and make it our own into it. And so I created another process map so that it would feather in with everybody else's process, like our go-to-market process, our create the offering process, you know, that kind of thing. So I was trying to make it more accessible. But what turned out was that by giving the organization, teams, another process, they had no idea what to do with it. So nothing happened for a couple of years. We actually talked about this. You know, we had this great definition of delight. We told everybody, explained to everybody why we needed to do it. Everyone's like, yep. We give them a process, and it's like crickets. Like nothing happens for 2 years. Everyone's like, we know we need to delight, but we don't know how to do it. And I was like, but I gave you a process. And they said, yeah, but I don't know how to do it. And so we had this great opportunity, total serendipity, to have an immersive experience with the CEO and his staff at an offsite. First time that he gave anyone a full day of his 2-day offsite and said, fine, you can teach us how to do this. And in the moment, we had to quickly try to put up an agenda for the day so they understood the day and what we were going to do. And my boss at the time said, quick, Suzanne, draw a diagram of like the empathy part and the go broad, go narrow part and the rapid experiments part. And I said, sure. So I just drew this, and it has stayed for 8 years. So be careful what you draw on a whiteboard. But it's good because it signals to us, you know, sort of the fact that it's not precious, you know, and it's also that design thinking for us is actually 3 core principles. It's to be used in any process by which you are running your part of the experience. So the first one is deep customer empathy. And we like to say, know your customers better than they know themselves. And we come from a long storied history. You remember that CDI model of spending a lot of time with our customers. In fact, our founder has told many people that we don't have an anthropologist on staff. We actually have 7,000, he'll say, because everyone's required to go out in the field and interact with our customers a lot. The problem is, the reason why we had to bring this back and focus on it this way is that a lot of, and I think our researchers will most appreciate this, we had devolved into this activity where we went in seeking validation for something that we had already created, right? How many of you guys know about that behavior, right? So you go in, you're not really open, you're not really observing, you're just saying, you do this, right? And you do this, right? And we don't do this, right? And we had pretty much devolved in that behavior system because we had kind of gotten to this role of dealing with voice of customer, which is like a long database filled with, you know, angry customers yelling at us for screwing up the quality of the product and not getting it right in the first place. And so we would go out and spend that time making sure that we were fixing that bug just right. So we had lost touch with actually a core skill set that we had that founded the company, which was just savoring the surprise, right? Watching what happens, going in with open hearts, open expectations, and really listening and observing, and then synthesizing that later, right? I think that the idea that research has become this act of like going in with a big moderator's guide, ask a million questions, write down the answer, leave, I'm done. Okay, now let's go through the transcripts and like highlight what they said and we'll just do what they said. That was our culture and it was really, really bad. And so this was all about getting back to the basics, right? And in fact, 8 years later, I'll say that even though we thought that we had made a lot of progress here, 8 years later, just in the last couple of months, we asked a couple of product leaders to say, what is the reason why your customer buys your product? What's the number one reason? And what did they say about it? And unfortunately, we still have pockets of the company where people could not articulate it. They couldn't articulate. They could articulate why the market needed this product. They could articulate why the technology was awesome, but they could not articulate why the customer wanted that product in the first place. And so this is a lifelong journey to bring people along, to teach them these skills. And I will say that at this point in time, we thought that we could teach the synthesis process to a lot of folks, right? If you're gonna send all these people out into the field, you gotta teach them how to synthesize. I will say, and this is somewhat controversial in my culture, and it probably will be here too, I no longer think that that's possible. That skill set is special to a certain segment of folks. The researchers in this room know how to do that really, really well. And the idea that we ever thought that we can actually teach that to somebody else was kind of radical, and it was cool to think of that, but we have not seen evidence that that can be done. What you can do, though, is you can democratize empathy, and that is important, right? You still have to make sure that the team can walk in your customer's shoes. You still have to make sure they understand the broader context for which the problem is that they're solving for, and you have to teach them to fall in love with the problem before falling in love with their solution. That you can democratize, that you can teach everybody. So we have a culture of this. Lots of people that go out a lot. So the second principle is to go broad, to go narrow. To get to one good idea, you must create lots of ideas. And you guys know this well. So I won't even really belabor this, right? Brainstorm like crazy. Create a culture where things aren't precious, right? Create rooms where Post-it notes fill the walls. Create, foam core boards where people can put stuff up and tear things down. The cancer to an organization is when people fall in love with the solution and they put things up and it's so precious that they're not willing to let it go. And we know innovation demands that you're willing to let almost anything go, right? So you have to model this behavior, and the people in this room are the best at that. Model the behavior. I think that the designers, especially at Intuit, I'll speak for us, they have this exquisite skill of bringing ideas to life, and then they model just throwing it away all the time, right? You have to do that. It's something that you have that not everybody else has, so I think it's a responsibility. These are examples of just a day in the life at Intuit. The thing that was surprising to us in our journey, though, was that, coming up with a million ideas, you can actually teach that skill pretty quickly and kind of get to some really interesting things. But we saw this fantastic phenomenon that was happening in our culture was that you create all these ideas, but then the selection of the ideas was always the crappy ideas. I was like, why did you pick the crappy idea? You just spent hours generating incredible ideas, like mind-bending ideas that you never thought that you could come up with. And just as soon as we said, okay, like, let's go and pick one, you picked the safe, crappy ideas. And we found out that people will pick based on what they believe they can personally see all the way through to the end. And so there's this implicit criteria of, it's the cheapest way, or it's the fastest way, or I know how I'm going to do it. And the idea of picking the one where, like, I have no idea how we would make that happen, people wouldn't select it. So we went back and said, you have to, and created tools and techniques, you have to select the ideas that you think will most delight the customer. This isn't innovation for innovation's sake, it's about delighting the customer. So make sure that you select based on that. So, pitfall that we ran into. And then there's the moving online, which affords us this wonderful opportunity to watch behavior, right? And I think it's too much of a broad sweep to say that behavior trumps sentiment, but I do think that we have data like we've never had before, and you really have to take advantage of that. You really do. I mean, we have reels and reels and reels of people that sit in a usability lab and say, this is easy, this is great. And you go back and look, and it's like, it took them 5x the amount of time it was supposed to take, and they're cursing throughout the whole thing, but at the very end, you say, how did it go? And they're like, it was awesome. Right? And it's because you're incenting people to come into your lab, you're paying them a lot of money, they want to be kind to you, And it's not to say go do away with usability lab and usability protocol, that's very important, but we have to balance that by watching what people do too. And what they say and what they do are often at odds. Often at odds. We recommend doing this at different levels of fidelity, right? So this is not about having to have working code every single time, though when you get to that, it's fantastic. But these are a couple pictures from the World Economic Forum. It's that fancy pants meeting in Davos that a bunch of the CEOs get to go to, a bunch of the entrepreneurs get to go to. And they had asked us to help facilitate a design thinking session, a D4D session. And so we asked these guys to experiment. And so we have these very fancy CEOs standing on the, on the sidewalks of San Francisco, seeing if they could spark the behavior that they were looking for in the experiment that we were asking them to run. You can do this. Anybody can do this. This is not hard, right? But if you were to put this behavior in a survey and say, would you or would you not honk if you're proud of your mile per gallon, I don't think you get the same thing than actually honking in the middle of San Francisco, right? So experiments and watching behavior doesn't have to be a high fidelity exercise. It'll get there eventually, but it doesn't have to be. And so that brings me to not just about delighting your customers, but how do you take all of that, all those sentiments, and apply it to your culture? Right? I think that one of the biggest learnings that I had and insights that we had really, really early on was that deep customer empathy was absolutely needed for our employee base. If we're going to change the way 8,000 people work, then we have to understand how 8,000 employees work. Right? And you have to know them better than they know themselves. And so the good thing is that the core team for the Design for Delight initiative was primarily designers. And designers who are willing to give it away, right? Not the craft of design, but the skill of design thinking. And that mindset was critical. And so what we did was we absolutely ensured that we lived and breathed those principles in everything that we did. And so we had to lean into the culture. It wasn't a culture that was willing to take up another process map. That was a big learning. It was also not another culture where you could show a PowerPoint slide and say, go do this, because it's important, and if you don't do it, we're not going to get our net promoters up. Because they get that intellectually, but they didn't get that behaviorally. So how do you actually change the behavior of 8,000 people. Well, you have to apply the same principles on them, same way. So this is a picture of that CEO offsite that I was talking about. I'm a young designer at this point, have not spent much time with the C-suite at all, and I'm facilitating, how many, 2, 4, 6 of them, 8 of them plus or minus, depending on the part of the day, during a very immersive, experiential training that took 8 hours. It was fantastic. The nice thing is like when you do design thinking, when you're trying to train folks on this, you can't do anything wrong. You guys know that, right? Like, you teach them how to have empathy, you give them the opportunity to have empathy, you give them the opportunity to come up with a bunch of ideas, you prove to them that their ideas are shitty because you put them in front of customers who hate them. They're like, but I get paid a lot of money. It's like, yes, and your ideas are worse than any of them. And then you make them go back and with humility come up with another idea, and you put them back in front of the customers and realize it's still not good enough, right? And you let them reflect on that and realize that innovation is hard, innovation takes a lot of time, innovation takes all the different skill sets, but most important, innovation takes that empathy, right? And the understanding of the customers. And so for the people in this room who are starting on this journey, probably the biggest tip that I can give you is don't try to tell your organization to do this. Give them the opportunity to do this, right? And in our organization, it takes about 6 to 10 times before it actually enters into your DNA and you start to make it your own. So this is the first time. Over this next 7 years, we made sure that everybody had at least 5 more opportunities to do it. We put it into new hire orientation. We put it in all the leadership training. We did it at all the leadership offsites. We did it, at staff meetings. We did it on all the big important projects, right? Anywhere that we could, we facilitated this opportunity to learn by hands-on experience. We created things that were called lean start-ins. Have you guys heard of lean startup? Raise your hand if you learned a lean startup, right? So we took that concept and it really bolstered that rapid experimentation with customers principle. And Eric came inside and taught us a whole bunch of things and gave us a new language. And then we created the Intuit version, and we called it lean start-in. And we created environments and opportunities for in-tech teams to come and spend a week running experiments, right? We created the Innovation Catalyst program. I have Innovation Catalysts in the room today from Intuit. Yay. And this was about, how do you scale then the ability to create the opportunity for that experience to be had, right? It couldn't happen with just 3 of us. We needed to create a lot more of us, and so we did. At one point, we were at 200. I think now we're at 400 innovation catalysts across the company. They're highly trained people who know design thinking through and through and understand what we're trying to go for, which is going beyond our customers' expectations end to end so we can delight them. So these guys are an incredible secret weapon. They're not that secret anymore, but they are extraordinary people in our organization. Our founder, this is Scott on the right, was a deep partner this whole time, this whole journey, deep collaborator with us. And to this day, he continues to coach teams himself, right? He is an avid learner and wants to learn from us, and we teach him, and he in turn coaches teams. So this is him coaching Brian Cross, who's one of our entrepreneurs, product managers for a new business that we're launching. These are all these lean startup tools that are on the back wall, our D4D tools on our back wall there, where he's just walking through the content. And so instead of asking the leaders to say, bring me your numbers, we're inviting the leaders to start much earlier on and ask, what are you learning? What are your insights? What's your hypothesis? What's the experiment? Okay, how did the experiment go? And in doing that, creating the permission for teams to go rapidly fail and then learn from that failure and then go again. And then I'm going to end on this slide, which is a really fun story. I think that if you want to delight your customers, I'm not worried about the fact that the people in this room know exactly what to do to delight the customers. You know, you have the idea in your mind, you know the problem, you know the solution, you even have the design laid out, you know how we would build it, right? But it's not just you in a vacuum that gets to decide that, right? You have to work in this bigger environment, this bigger container. And until you get empathy and understanding for the bigger container and then start to change that, you will only be as successful as you run up against it, right? And this was one of the best exercises that I think we ever did. I can't take claim for it, actually. A guy on my team named Lionel actually came up with this idea. We realized that leaders, you know, VPs and above, were actually the problem children, for sure. Does that happen in your company, right? With the best of intentions, they are trying so hard to make sure that the rest of us are set up for success. But they tend to get in our way all the time, right? Because they give us best practices to go find, or they give us added resources, or they take our resources away, or they like put things on pause, or they accelerate things, or they ask for a measure like this, but then the next day they ask for a measure like that. They want, you know, to approve things that only they feel like they should approve. They want to see every little granular bit of detail until they don't have time, and then they just want the outcome, right? Very inconsistent behavior. And frontline employees are like pulling their hair out. So, for the leaders to get empathy for the rest of the organization and their impact on the rest of the organization, we did this exercise called the Lego exercise. So we gave all the leaders, we put them in teams of 3 or 4, something like that. We gave them a box of Legos like for a truck. Everyone was doing a fleet of trucks. But they didn't know that we had gone into the boxes and pulled out like all the tires, you know, all the wheels. And we said, okay, you have 4 VPs. You got a half an hour to put together this thing. You can do this, right? And we said, but to get agreement on color, you have to go see the chief color officer over there. To get the wheels, you have to go to the chief tire officer over there. To get any resources, you have to go to the resource captain over there, so on and so forth. And we made them, you know, they had to do a PowerPoint presentation on how to put a Lego truck together. They had to get they had to have rationale of like what stickers to put on the side of it. I mean, I think of all the teams that we had, I think there was about 30 teams, 1 finished in half an hour. And the only reason they finished, the only way they finished, was by saying F you to the rest of us who are facilitating the exercise, right? They're like, you are getting in our way. We're like, huh, really? I wonder what that feels like. So my recommendation to you is, if you're here to delight your customers, you have to think about the culture and the environment from within, right? Because if your whole culture and environment isn't laser focused on the same thing and they don't understand their part in it, then you're kind of on your own. And if you're on your own, you're probably not going to be so successful. You have to bring everybody else along. So take the long view, have empathy for those that you work with, both up and down, create experiences so they can have empathy, right, for the customers, but each other, right? And when you do that, I think that you'll set yourselves up to be able to do some of the best work of your life. Thank you.